I feel compelled to do a coding demo today because we recently had an episode with Oscar Wickstrom on property testing. And while it's fresh in my mind, I can't resist doing a quick demo for you because there are two things I really like about property testing that I think I can demonstrate. The first is it's much more thorough at testing software than human beings are. It's much more thorough than I am. And I like that. I like giving work to a computer when it's better at the work than I am. The other is that property testing has a terrific return on investment. In the places where it's a good fit, it does so much work for so little effort. The bang for buck is fantastic. And I think I can show that to you. So my number one use case of property testing is serialization. I've often got some data that I'm sending back and forth over a network, probably as JSON, and I would like to be certain that whatever I write out, I can read back. So I'm going to do a demo of that with property tests. So have a look here. We'll start with a fresh directory. And I'm going to use one of my favorite languages for this called PureScript. It's one of those languages that compiles to JavaScript. It's a very nicely designed language. It's got a great type system. And it works really well in the browser and on the back end. So it's kind of become my go-to full stack language, which is great. I can write one language for both sides, but it does mean a lot of JSON wrangling. So this is a really useful technique. So let's get started. You can skip in the chapter markers if you don't want to see the whole thing, but let me install some packages first. So if I do npm install at development time, I want PureScript. I want PureScript's language server, which will give me LSP support. And I want my favorite code formatter, PureT. And then I need the build tool for PureScript, which is called Spago. I assume because it's the Australian for spaghetti. I'm not quite sure why it's called Spago, but if I download those, that should give me the environment I need to write PureScript. And I'm going to say Spago init for a new project. And that gives me a base PureScript project. Now, I need some PureScript libraries. I want to install my favorite testing library, which is called Spec. I want to do property testing, so I'll need Spec Quick Check for that. And I will also need Simple JSON, which is my favorite JSON serialization library. And one more, I think I'll get debug. I think we're going to end up using the debugging tool so I can show you some extra stuff under the hood. That should be enough. If I do Spago test, that will compile all my libraries down, and with a bit of luck, yeah, you should add some tests. Yes, I really should. But the tests I don't have succeeded. Great. Okay, so some coding. Why don't I leave the test suite running in the background like that and have a look at the two default PureScript libraries I've been given. Okay, the one on the left is my main, the one on the right is my test. So I'm going to take everything out of main and define a new type called user. And the user type is going to have a name, which will be a string, and an age, which will be an int. Let's get one more primitive in. Let's have gender, which everyone knows is a number. There we go. So that's the type I would like to serialize and reliably read back. Let's have a look in my unit tests. I want to describe a test suite that says JSON round trips always work. And then I want to say we're testing main user. In real code, I'd tighten up some of these labels, but for the demo, this is fine. My test is going to look like this. I'm going to say to the property testing library, why don't you go away and give me a user which has the type user that I've already defined on the left. I'm not going to tell you how to do it. Just go away and generate me a random user. And then with that user, I ought to be able to say, no matter what user you give me, if I write that user out as JSON, and then I read that back as JSON, the thing I get back should be exactly equal to the original user, right? That's the definition of proper serialization. So how do we make that actually work? That's the shape. I need to do a bit of tightening before this will actually execute. So the first thing is that describes a test suite. To actually run it, there's some magic words you need to say to run the test suite. This is in the documentation for the spec library. Say launch AF, run spec with a console reporter, like that. That should do it. And then the other thing is writing JSON always produces a string. Reading JSON could say, well, I couldn't read it. There was a serialization error. So I need to say either this was like successfully decoded as a user, or it was an error message, right? I need to do something like that. It's going to come back wrapped in some kind of error or not structure. And the name for that in PureScript is write. So I need to wrap it in a write constructor, which you can read as like OK or success. That's PureScript syntax. I'm going to try and go light on that so we can see the shape of things. With that, I'll just do the code formatter over it. And let's just see if we can get this to compile. And I'm probably going to go through an import dance here. Let me race through that. Hopefully it won't take too long. If it does, I'll fast forward. But if you're hearing this, it didn't take too long. And I think it's nice to see the entire process. So let me just import all of these. Yep. Almost there. As we go through this, you can kind of see how the abstract syntax tree is constructed. Yeah, there we go. Okay, so that test compiles. I just take out that warning. Let's have a look at the test suite. JSON round trips always work. Main user, one test passed. It works, but I don't think on its own that's very convincing. So let me do this. I said we probably want to use the debugging library. If I do import debug spy, this is a very useful PureScript function, I can wrap this write JSON call. And I can change this so it says take the user, write it as JSON, but before you do anything else, let's just have a peek. Let's have a cheeky peek at the raw JSON. If I write that, then the test case runs, and it's much more convincing, I think. You can see here we're generating loads of different unit test cases, all practically for free. We've got names, we've got genders, we've got ages, we've got those corner cases like empty names or negative ages or UTF-16 characters in the name or unprintable characters in the name, all sorts of stuff. And it's just testing, I think it's testing about 100. It's tunable. I think it's 100 out of the box. 100 different users randomly generated and checked that they serialize in both directions. That's a pretty good test. That's a lot of work for, I'm going to call that 4 lines of actual test code. That's cool. But I think we can go further. I think we can go further with this. So let me come along a couple of weeks later in this project and say, actually, we need a new field on users. We're going to keep track of whether someone's an adult, and I'm going to add in a Boolean. How much work do I need to do to bring my test suite back up to spec? If I write this file, absolutely none. I get all the generation of the new kind of user and all the serialization tests absolutely for free. I think that's cool. But we can go even further than that. So if I now define a new type called, let's say, a department, and a department consists of a title for the department, which is a primitive string, and some members of the department, which is an array of user. So we've got all the things in here. We've got a primitive string, a collection of a custom type. And now I'll go over here, I'll copy and paste that user test, and I will say change all the users for departments. Yep, so I've got 4 new testing lines. I could abstract this out into a helper function. I won't for this video. I won't yet, but in real code, I probably would. Now, if I write that and make sure I've imported department, and make sure I've written both files so I can import department. There we go. Now look at that. I've got department tests too. And they all serialize nicely. And I'm starting to get random things like emojis in there. And what else have we got? And interesting things like the edge case where there are no members, or lots of members, or one member, or exotic characters in the title. All that stuff completely for free. And I can keep rerunning it and get more test cases. And it's fast, it's generating loads of different data and checking that they all will serialize successfully. That makes me a lot more confident than a handful of handwritten unit tests. I like that. Let's just do one more thing to drive the point home. So I am going to now come along and say users were more complicated than we think. Gender isn't a number. It's much more complex than that. It's a complex type. And a complex type, as you will know, contains a real part and an imaginary part. And so I've now made the subtype more complex. I don't have any testing for that. Will I once again get all my updated tests for free? Yes, I will. And there we go. Gender is now a real number and an imaginary number. And it's all mixed in there, all for free, all vastly more complicated and vastly more thorough unit tests than I would ever write by hand. And that to me is the magic of property testing. A little bit of test code that pulls a lot of weight. And sometimes the maintenance of it is cheap and it's often completely free. I think that's compelling. And that's all I wanted to show you. If you liked it, click like. If lots of you like it, then we'll do more coding videos. And if you'd like to know how you can take the idea of property testing much, much further in much more hairy situations, as I say, we did a deep dive interview with Oscar Wickstrom recently. There'll be a link to that showing up somewhere on screen now. And he goes into some really nice strategies for property testing. So I'll leave you with him. Thanks for listening.